Okay, so before I start this video, I just have one question, and that's, what is a furry? I mean, if you look at Google, there's a pretty simple explanation, and that's that it's an anthropomorphic animal, right? Except that's a pretty loose definition, because then this character here would be a furry, despite looking mostly human except for, the ears and the tail. And not to mention, I guess any e-girl wearing cat ears on their headphones would also be a furry at that point. Which, I mean, that's fine, I guess, but I don't think it would be accurate to call them a furry. Then on the opposite end, you have Sonic, who is also a furry by definition because he's an anthropomorphic hedgehog. But I don't think he's quite human enough with his qualities to match what most people would think of when they think of the word furry. I guess really you'd have to combine the two, and in doing so you'd get something like... oh no. Yeah, this video's on Titan Tales, which is for sure one of the more out there stories that you can find in the Archie Sonic comics, and it's pretty likely you've seen pictures of him before just by searching up the Archie Sonic comics, because on YouTube, I mean, you'll find him in at least one thumbnail. And like, I'm not judging people who use him as an example of whack Sonic comic stuff, because I mean, he's even shown up in one of my videos already, and he is a really good example of some of the weirdest stuff to come out of the comic books. Now, here's the thing. Yes, Titan Tales is weird, but in my opinion, the most bizarre stuff in this entire story is the build-up to Titan Tales. So we'll get to him in a second, but for now, I want to focus on this three-part Tales comic miniseries, which actually lays the foundation for what Titan Tales would be in the Archie Sonic comics. So this story starts off with Tails writing his own fan fiction, in which he's a super jacked superhero, which is the most inadvertent foreshadowing I've ever seen in a comic book. From here, the story gets actually weirder, because Tails remarks that his story is lacking historical accuracy, because Tails isn't a super jacked superhero, at least not yet. But not to worry, because a manta ray shows up, and he mentions that that's okay because Pocahontas wasn't historically accurate either, which I guess means that there's a Mobius counterpart to Pocahontas who also had a Mobian Disney adaptation, I guess? Anyway, it's not really worth it to worry about a children's comic as Tails arrives down under, which is Mobius's version of Australia, where Robotnik's henchman Crocbot sends some badniks to ambush and beat up Tails. I guess Tails getting beaten up by badniks is a theme when it comes to weird Tails-centered stories, because the other Tails story that I made a video on, in which Tails meets a unicorn who makes Tails into a sniper, also starts off this way. Luckily for Tails, the Down Under freedom fighters come to save Tails after he's beaten, and then after they save him, well, they dump him in a crater. It's when Tails wakes up in this crater, or as he puts it, a huge pit, that he hears some chanting in another room, and while searching for whatever is chanting the word hello, he finds these things which are titled Ancient Walkers. He also sees a silhouette, which he mistakes for Knuckles, which shows that I'm not the only person that thinks it's hard to tell echidnas apart, especially when they all look the same. I'm looking at you. Every single echidna in Knuckles' family tree. Except, maybe Tails should get his eyes checked, because I don't think I'd ever mistake whatever this silhouette of a thing is for Knuckles. No, this guy here is a Thair, and like other echidnas, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but this guy knows for sure that Tails is the chosen one. What is the chosen one? Well, Tails is told to listen to the Ancient Walkers for some guidance, but Tails is all about kicking butt and taking names, and there's no more names to take here, but there's plenty of butts to kick outside of the crater. This upsets Thair, who manages to sum up the entirety of the important bits surrounding the Echidna people's history in about 3 panels, which is commendable considering that Ken Penders spent the entirety of his career trying to explain that story. Then Tails pulls this weird line out of nowhere where he's like, well, my friend Sonic knows Knuckles. And it's like, Tails, honey, so do you. You don't need to name drop Sonic for some old man who lives in a hole. He probably doesn't even know who Sonic is, but he thinks you're the chosen one. You're the number one here in your story. You don't need to bring up Sonic. Thair explains that Sonic knowing Knuckles doesn't mean much to him, as Thair also knows Knuckles as he's his great-grandfather. What a twist. Except, much like myself, Tails doesn't care about Knuckles' family tree, and so he goes to leave, except he's stopped by this weird bird dinosaur thing wearing some Mercedes-Benz bling for whatever reason. It's here that Tails learns from these ancient walkers while being held down with a pointy stick, that the Master Emerald crashed on Mobius during its prehistoric era, and it led to all kinds of wonderful inventions, such as paganism for some reason. Anyway, after hearing that story, Tails is healed, and old Knuckles as well as the magic dinosaurs are gone, and so Tails leaves to go to work with the Down Under freedom fighters. With that, we can kind of skip past everything else that happens in the Tails story and move back to the Archie Sonic comics, as we look at the story that would create Titan Tails. And you can tell that this story, which is linked to the Tails miniseries and focuses on Tails, is important to the writers of this comic book because, I mean, just look at the cover of the story in which Tails is the chosen one. So, in this story, Tails and Sonic are playing hide and go seek, and the character who can fly can't find Sonic because he's hidden too high up. Let me repeat. The character who can fly easily above the tree lines isn't looking above the tree lines and also can't look directly above him. It doesn't really matter anyways to think about this because Sonic the Zone Cop shows up and he interrupts the game. What do you mean you don't know the iconic character Sonic? Well, basically for the uninformed, Sonic is Sonic from another universe where everybody's name starts with the letter Z or the letter Z depending on where you're from, and they work as interdimensional police, or Zinterdimensional Zolice. Sonic informs them that the multiverse is going to be destroyed, and surprisingly, he doesn't need Sonic's help, but rather he needs Tails. Although probably the weirdest thing that happens on this page isn't the fact that he needs Tails or that Sonic is even here, but it's the fact that Tails can't pronounce the word perpendicular, which, I don't know, that's kind of weird, right? Anyways, Sonic takes him to his headquarters, where he has monitors looking at all the other versions of Sonic, because I guess Sonic, much like Sonic, is a bit of a narcissist. The DeviantArt gang, though, is all here on the wall. You've got yourself Lady Sonic, Sonic the Squid, Fat Sonic, and Muscular Sonic. Back to the story. There's this bad guy named Mammoth Mogul, and he's trying to take all the power from the multiverse and destroy it as well as take it for himself. I won't really get into it because, honestly, there isn't that much to get into. But it's explained that Mammoth Mogul fought Knuckles and killed Knuckles, actually. But Knuckles, as we know in the Archie comics, is Jesus, so he resurrected himself, which made the universe unbalanced, and now, for some reason, Mammoth Mogul can take all of the universe's power for himself. Mammoth Mogul shows up in the Sonic Zone world, and all the other Sonic people try to fight him, but it's no use as he's way too strong. Luckily, Sonic didn't know which Tails was the right Tails to grab, so he traveled the multiverse and just yoinked all of them as he went along, and then I guess put them in this room when he found out that they were the wrong Tails. You've got all the greats here. There's Batman Tails, there's Buff Tails, there's Emo Boy Tails, there's culturally insensitive Tails, Fat Tails, and of course, who could forget Pregnant Tails? People talk about Titan Tails like he was this super weird moment and all, which, yeah, he is, but they sleep on the fact that there was a version of Tails who got knocked up, and maybe the biggest offender in this entire room is that there's a Tails who wears pants. Remember when I said that this was the cover to this Tails-centric story? Well, I sort of kind of lied, because that's the cover to part 1 of this story. The cover to part 2 of the story is this guy here. You know, the cover to the story where Tails is the chosen one and everything is depending on him. That's the cover. For real though, I know that I'm being silly here, and that these comics are actually split into 2 parts, with one story at the beginning, and then the second story being the Tails-centered story. So of course, the cover for this comic is covering the story in which, while Sonic is gone, Anti-Sonic, the evil Sonic who would later become a green Sonic named Scourge, is pretending to be Sonic in Sonic's absence, as he tries to hook up with the most unreasonably busty character to exist in the Sonic story. Shortly after he hooked up with Bunny after making Bunny think that he was Sonic. I get that Titan Tails is funny to laugh at, I do. I mean, I think this whole thing is ridiculous. But like, it becomes a lot less wild when you read the entire story surrounding this. Because the story as a whole, I mean, going back to the Tails story and then also just looking at this weird rapey stuff that's going on with Anti-Sonic, it all makes this story seem a lot less weird when all of this is surrounded by some of the weirdest fanfiction-esque stories I've ever heard. Back to the Sonic world. All the Tailses are fighting the big glowing mammoth, but they aren't really making any headway. But when all hope seems lost, Tails sees a Thayer who tells him that this moment right here is Tails' moment as the chosen one, and Tails knows what he has to do, which is that Tails combines himself with every other version of Tails, which makes him super jacked, and also probably pregnant now. Finally though, we've had so much build-up, and now it's time for an epic fight between this giant Tails and this giant Mammoth Man, right? Well, no, of course not. Why would you think that? No, what Tails does instead is he spins his tails really fast to make a fan and he sucks up all of Mammoth Smoggle's energy. Then Titan Tails raises his hands to the sky and he and Sonic find themselves back in the woods. Except weirdly, none of them remember the adventure they just went on. And so you might be wondering, if they don't remember any of this, what's the point of this? And well, yeah, that's basically it. There is no point. This story is ridiculous. Oh, also, I forgot to mention, but at the end here, we do find out that Merlin is Tails' uncle, and that also Mammoth Mogul is trapped inside of a Chaos Emerald that Merlin is keeping. But honestly, in comparison to everything else, that's pretty tame. So yeah, that was something, right? So this is Editing Sam here, and just before I get into my closing remarks on this video, I have a fun fact that I found out while editing this video, and it's just as weird as pretty much everything else we've seen, so it fits pretty well.
There's one person who might be able to help us now. My great-grandfather Athair, the ancient sage of the Echidnas.
A Chaos Emerald has been broken. I can feel the chaos swirling around us, tearing Mobius apart.
And the fun fact is that Athair actually showed up in Sonic Underground, which is weird. I mean, Sonic Underground is not the best TV show in the world. And the fact that they chose a character from the Archie Sonic comics to be in it is just very, very strange. He's actually the only one out of Knuckles' family in the Archie Sonic comic universe to have shown up inside of another form of media that wasn't related to the Archie Sonic comics, which is neat, especially because he's not a Ken Penders character, so that would mean that to this day, the only person in Knuckles' family to ever show up wasn't made by Ken, which, I mean, it's gotta sting for the guy who's been pushing so hard to have his universe pushed into the real Sonic world. Also, not really related to any of this, but the episode that Athair shows up in has the worst walk cycle I have ever seen on a TV show. And on top of that, this is unrelated completely to everything, but I don't know when I'm ever going to talk about Sonic Underground. But here's a fun fact about French Sonic Underground, which is that for some reason in their opening title, they chose to use Comic Sans for the credits. I don't understand why, it's disgusting and I hate it. Alright, back to the video. Yeah, it was a lot of fun to talk about. It ended up longer than I thought it would, but I ended up really enjoying the script. I wrote it a little bit more joke heavy than others, but honestly, I think something like this doesn't need to be talked about too seriously, and it's pretty fair to joke around about it, especially because I just finished editing one of my longest videos, which is 20-something minutes long, and I needed to do something fun. It's really hard to do a video on just Titan Tails, considering that he shows up for exactly 4 panels, and then he's never talked about again in the entirety of the Archie Sonic comics, as far as I can tell. But for such a short run he's got, you've got a lot of backstory to go over, and it's a fun story to talk about. Anyways, thanks to Milkman 1032 Gaming for suggesting that I look into this. I hope that you specifically enjoyed it, and I hope that the rest of you, the viewers, also enjoyed this. And if you did, well, I'm not your boss or anything, but it would mean the world to me that if you did all that stuff that YouTube people ask for, like, you know, liking it and subscribing, doing all that kind of junk. But really, at the end of the day, I don't care if you do that. I just hope that you have a good one. But Tails is all about kicking butt and taking names, so he's got to leave because there's no more names to take here. But there's plenty of butts to... That's so dumb.